Before there was a state, before the gold rush, before the dream, there was only a name, born not from the land, but from legend. And somehow, it came true. Sometimes, the most powerful truths begin as stories. Long before California became the land of dreams, before it was a state, a tech empire, or a cultural icon, it was a myth. A tale told in an old Spanish novel about a golden island ruled by warrior queens, and yet, that name endured. It made its way from fantasy to fact, from imagination to identity. In this video, we'll trace the emotional journey of a name, California, and how it came to define not just a place, but the dreams of generations. 1. The mythical beginning. Long before there was a state, before there were cities or freeways or dreams of Silicon Valley, there was only a story. It was the early 1500s, and the world was still largely unknown to European explorers. Somewhere between the pages of fantasy and the edges of ancient maps, a novel emerged in Spain. Its title was Los Sergos de Esplandian, and it told of a paradise beyond the edge of the known world, a place of fierce beauty and unimaginable wealth. In this tale lived a queen. Her name was Calafia. She ruled over a mystical island, populated entirely by black warrior women. These women were bold, proud, and unmatched in battle. Their island, called California, was said to be very close to the side of the terrestrial paradise, filled with gold, pearls, and exotic creatures. It was a place untouched by men, where the natural world overflowed with power and purity. Even the animals, griffins, in some versions, were wild yet loyal to the queens who ruled them. To the people of 16th century Spain, these weren't just bedtime stories. These tales were believed, half myth, half possibility, because the world was still full of uncharted territory. Every sailor, every conquistador, carried with him the hunger not just for land or wealth, but for glory. And in Queen Calafia's California, they saw it all. So when Spanish explorers began sailing the uncharted waters off the western edge of the Americas, they carried the name with them, California. It wasn't just a label, it was a dream. A map etched in the imagination. When they landed on the Baja Peninsula, they believed they had found it, the island of legend. For years, even decades, maps continued to show California not as part of a continent, but as a separate, magical island. A place of wonder and untapped promise. A place that didn't yet exist, but could. Think about that. A fictional island, born from a novel, became real, simply because enough people wanted it to be. But this wasn't just a case of mistaken geography. It was a powerful reflection of something deeper, a human need to believe in distant utopias. To chase something better, something brighter, something just beyond reach. The name California wasn't given by chance. It was chosen, remembered, passed down, because it carried with it the echoes of a myth that made men risk everything. It symbolized hope, adventure, and the belief that paradise might still be out there, waiting to be claimed. And that myth never really disappeared. Even today, the spirit of Queen Calafia lives on, not in ancient books, but in the identity of a state that still promises the extraordinary. A place where people come to reinvent themselves, to chase gold, whether in the form of dreams, art, or code, and to believe that the impossible might just be one step away. Before there was California the state, there was California the story. And that story was magic. 2. Exploration and confusion. The power of myth has a way of bending reality, and for more than a century, it shaped the very maps of the world. After the legend of Queen Calafia captured the imagination of Spain, explorers set sail to find the fabled island of California. What they discovered was land, rocky, wild, and unfamiliar. But it wasn't the lush, golden paradise they had read about. Still, they believed. The desire to confirm the legend was stronger than the evidence before them. In 1533, Spanish explorers stumbled upon what we now know as the Baja California Peninsula. They saw water on both sides and assumed, perhaps even hoped, that they had landed on an island. And just like that, fiction began to masquerade as fact. By 1539, navigator Francisco de Ulloa had sailed up the Gulf of California, proving it was a peninsula attached to the mainland. But that truth didn't stick. The myth had already embedded itself too deeply in the minds of cartographers, kings, and fortune seekers. Instead of accepting Ulloa's discovery, many rejected it. They clung to the image of California as an island, separated from the mainland by a narrow strait. For the next 100 years, maps continued to depict this fictional geography. Some of the most respected mapmakers in Europe, Dutch, Spanish, French, reproduced California as a floating landmass, untethered and idealized. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a reflection of the human psyche. The world was still vast and uncertain, and people found comfort in the idea of hidden lands filled with wealth and wonder. The myth of the island offered something the real world often did not: the promise of discovery without the burden of disappointment. In the late 1500s and early 1600s, explorers like Sebastián Vizcaíno continued to map the California coast, naming places like Monterey and Santa Barbara. But the question still lingered: was this land part of a continent, or a realm apart? The confusion persisted for generations, reinforced by politics, pride, and printed maps. Even as evidence slowly mounted that California was in fact part of the mainland, the island theory refused to die. It appeared on official documents, royal charts, and schoolbooks. People saw what they expected to see, not what was true. It wasn't until the mid-1700s, over 2 centuries after the myth had first taken root, that the debate was finally laid to rest. Explorers like Father Eusebio Kino and later Juan Bautista de Anza helped provide the definitive proof: California was no island. It was landlocked, vast, and undeniably part of North America. But by then, the name had already done its work. California had spread far beyond its fictional origins. It had become an idea, a brand, a symbol of possibility. And like the explorers before them, settlers and dreamers would come to this place not for what it was, but for what it could be. Maps were corrected. The myth was finally retired. But the confusion left behind something lasting, an enduring aura of mystery, a legacy born not in fact, but in faith. And California never looked the same again. 3. The name becomes reality. Sometimes, the most powerful names are the ones that were never meant to be real. California began as fiction, ink on a page, imagined by a Spanish author who never set foot in the New World. It was a fantasy, a tale of a black queen, warrior women, and a gold-covered island beyond the edges of the known world. And yet, against all logic and all odds, that name refused to stay on the page. As the centuries passed and explorers sailed west, the word California followed them, not because it made sense, but because it felt like destiny. When they looked upon the rugged coastline of the Baja Peninsula and later the vast stretch of the Pacific shore, something in the landscape echoed the myth. Vast, isolated, beautiful, wild. Even if the island turned out to be part of a continent, the idea of California had already taken root. The truth was undeniable: this land was not the mythical island of Queen Calafia. But explorers, cartographers, and colonizers didn't abandon the name. They embraced it. They chose to believe. Why? Because names hold power, not in the letters they're made of, but in the dreams they carry. By the 1700s, as the Spanish Empire expanded northward, missionaries and settlers established outposts along the coast: San Diego, Monterey, San Francisco. They began to refer to this entire region as Alta California, Upper California, as distinct from the Baja Peninsula to the south. And yet, despite all the changes, the word California remained tethered to the original dream. It still evoked something rich, untamed, and full of promise. No longer an island of fantasy, but something perhaps even more captivating: a real place built on the bones of a myth. As Spanish rule faded and Mexico gained independence, California remained a distant frontier, beautiful and barely tamed. Then, in the 1840s, American settlers began to arrive in greater numbers, drawn by the land, the coast, the climate, and perhaps, unknowingly, by the legend. When the United States acquired the territory in 1848, something remarkable happened. Just days later, gold was discovered in the Sierra Nevada foothills, and almost overnight, California once again became a place of impossible dreams. But this time, it wasn't a queen's treasure, it was the treasure of the earth itself. Tens of thousands flocked to this land, chasing fortune, freedom, and a fresh start. And as they came, they gave weight and meaning to a name once born in fantasy. California became not just a label on a map, but a promise, a place where the line between myth and reality could blur. In 1850, California became the 31st state of the Union. A state with no colonial name, no saintly tribute, no geographic reference. Just California. A name pulled from fiction, now etched into history. A dream made real. And to this day, when people hear the word California, they don't think of a Spanish novel. They think of sun and waves, stars and startups, reinvention and risk. They think of possibility. Because sometimes, the stories we tell become the world we live in. 4. Gold, dreams, and statehood. In the quiet hills near a place called Sutter's Mill, something glittered beneath the surface of the American River. It was 1848. Just days after the ink dried on the treaty that handed California from Mexico to the United States, a carpenter named James Marshall spotted flecks of gold in the water. At first, it seemed like a coincidence, a curious discovery in a distant territory few Americans had even seen. But what followed was anything but ordinary. Word of the discovery spread like wildfire. First whispers, then rumors, then headlines. And soon, from across the country and around the world, tens of thousands of people came rushing west. By land, by sea, on foot and on hope, they came chasing a dream. They called it gold fever, but it was more than greed. It was the resurrection of something older. Something deeper. The myth of California was alive again, not as an island ruled by queens, but as a land of second chances and instant fortune. A place where men could arrive with nothing and leave with everything. The old legend of Queen Calafia's golden paradise suddenly didn't feel so far-fetched. What had once been a remote, sparsely populated frontier exploded into a global magnet for ambition. People came from China, Chile, Germany, Ireland, the eastern United States. They came in wagons, in ships, in desperation. San Francisco transformed from a sleepy coastal village into a chaotic boomtown almost overnight. Fortunes were made, and just as often, lost. And yet, they kept coming. Because California was no longer just a place, it was a promise. But with that promise came chaos. The sudden population boom created deep tensions, over land, resources, race, and power. There was no clear legal system, no protection, no structure. The US government hadn't yet decided what to do with this wild new frontier. So the settlers took matters into their own hands. In 1849, they gathered to write a constitution, an ambitious act of self-determination. They outlawed slavery, they demanded inclusion. And they asked to join the Union, not as a territory, but directly as a state. In 1850, Congress agreed. California became the 31st state of the United States. No waiting period. No territorial phase. Just a leap. From ungoverned gold rush chaos to full statehood in less than 2 years. It was unprecedented. And once again, the name California changed meaning. What started as a legend, then became a location, was now something even greater, an idea that had shaped reality. A dream so powerful, it forced the hand of history. From mythical island to geopolitical prize. To the golden heart of a nation in expansion, California had traveled a long, improbable path. But the one constant, through every chapter, was the dream. A dream of wealth. Of reinvention. Of freedom. A dream that still echoes today, in every entrepreneur chasing a startup, every artist looking for a breakthrough, every migrant hoping for a better life. It began with a story. It grew through gold. And it became a state built not just on land, but on longing. 5. Legacy of the name. Some names fade with time. But others grow stronger, because they don't just describe a place, they define what people believe is possible. California is one of those names. It began as a fantasy, an island of warrior women, gold, and untamed beauty. It lived only in the pages of a novel. But over centuries, that word became so much more than fiction. It became a destination. A dream. An identity. Even now, long after the myth was proven false and the maps were corrected, the legend of California still lives on, not in stories about Queen Calafia, but in the lives of real people chasing something better. Because California, as we know it today, still carries the essence of its imagined origin. It's the land of reinvention, of new beginnings, of gold, not just in the ground, but in the light, in the opportunity, in the promise of transformation. When people hear California, they don't think of a Spanish romance novel. They think of Hollywood, of Silicon Valley, of surf and sun and sky, of risk-takers, artists, immigrants, and pioneers who came west because they believed in something bigger than themselves. They think of a state that produces ideas the world runs on. And yet, if you listen closely, the echoes of the myth are still there. Queen Calafia, fierce and regal, lives on in murals across Los Angeles and in the names of schools, parks, and even military vessels. The island that never was, surrounded by riches and danger, feels hauntingly familiar in the modern California, with its beauty and brutality, its extremes of wealth and struggle. The legend never really left, it just evolved. It whispers through the redwoods, hums across the desert wind, dances in the glow of neon lights. It's in the gold rush towns now turned to ghost stories. In the tech empires built on dreams that once seemed impossible. In every migrant who crosses a border, every actor who arrives with a suitcase and a script, every inventor trying to change the world from a garage. The name California carries centuries of longing, centuries of people trying to turn myth into reality. And in a way, they have. California is still a land of contradiction and magic. Of limitless wealth and aching poverty. Of overwhelming beauty and devastating fire. It is real and unreal all at once. And perhaps that's the most powerful legacy of all. That a name born from fiction could become a mirror of humanity's deepest hopes and flaws. That something imagined could shape the real world so profoundly. That we are, in the end, still driven by the stories we tell, and the names we give to the places where we choose to believe. So when you say California, you're not just naming a state. You're invoking a myth that never died. A dream that still lives. And a legacy that keeps daring the world to believe that somewhere out west, something greater is waiting. From the pages of a forgotten romance novel to the coastline of a nation's greatest ambitions, California's name reminds us of something quietly profound. That the stories we tell can shape the future we live in. Whether it's a gold rush, a movie script, a startup idea, or the courage to begin again, this place has always been about chasing the impossible. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in the power of dreams. And if you'd like to uncover more untold stories behind the names we say every day, don't forget to like, comment below, and subscribe for more. Your support helps keep these hidden histories alive.